Hi, I'm Natalie, and I spent 3 years being digitally erased by my own sister. Vanessa blocked me from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, even LinkedIn, all because my existence didn't match her perfectly curated brand. She told everyone I was going through a phase when really, I was just refusing to play along with her lies anymore. But here's the thing about trying to erase someone. Eventually, the truth finds a way to surface. And when it did, her followers got to see exactly what kind of person she really was, complete with mugshots and court documents that no filter could fix. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The notification sound felt like a slap across the face. I was sitting in my tiny temp apartment, laptop balanced on my knees, trying to finish a freelance graphic design project when my phone lit up with the familiar Instagram chime. Except when I opened the app, Vanessa's profile had vanished. Not just her latest post, not just her story, but her entire account. Like she had never existed in my digital world. I refreshed the page 3 times before the reality hit me. She had blocked me. My own sister had blocked me on Instagram without a word, without an explanation, without even the courtesy of a fight first. The last time we had spoken was 2 weeks ago, at our parents' house in Chandler, where she had rolled her eyes when I mentioned my new apartment and called it very minimalist. In that tone that meant the opposite of a compliment, I sat there staring at the screen showing user not found, where her perfectly staged life used to be. Vanessa Brooks, lifestyle coach and Arizona's rising social media darling, had officially erased me from her online existence. The woman who posted daily quotes about family being everything, who shared throwback photos of us as kids with captions about sisterly bonds, had decided I was bad for her brand. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my college roommate, Kel. "Girl, did you see Vanessa's story about toxic family members? She's really going through it. Hope you two are okay." My stomach dropped. I couldn't see whatever story Kelly was referring to, but I could imagine. Vanessa had a talent for spinning narratives, especially ones where she was the victim, and everyone else was just misunderstood supporting characters in her journey toward enlightenment. I grabbed my laptop and opened Facebook, hoping to at least see what she was saying about me to our mutual friends. Blocked there too, Twitter, TikTok, even LinkedIn, where she posted her professional content about real estate success and mindset coaching. Everywhere I looked, I had been systematically removed from her digital presence. It was like she had performed some kind of social media exorcism, casting out the demon that was her imperfect sister. I called our mom, Patricia, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound neutral but was clearly taking sides. "Oh honey," she said when I explained what had happened. "Vanessa mentioned she needed some space from negativity. She's launching that new coaching program next month, and you know how stressful these big career moves can be." "Negativity," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "Mom," she blocked me on every platform without even telling me why. "Well, you did make that comment about her engagement photos being overly staged. Maybe she felt judged." I remembered the comment. Vanessa had posted 17 different shots from her engagement session with Brad, her fiancé who worked in pharmaceutical sales and had the personality of wet cardboard. I had jokingly commented, "Did you guys take a photo for every grain of sand in Sedona?" with a laughing emoji. It was teasing, not malicious. The kind of things sisters say to each other. "That was 3 months ago, Mom, and it was a joke." "Sometimes jokes hurt more than we realize," Patricia said, and I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably organizing something that didn't need organizing. "Your sister is building something important. She has over 50,000 followers now, and brands are starting to notice her. Maybe you could be more supportive." There it was, the familiar refrain I had been hearing my entire life. Be more supportive of Vanessa. Be more understanding. Be smaller so she could shine brighter. I hung up feeling more isolated than I had in years. The next few days passed in a strange blur of digital phantom limb syndrome. I kept reaching for my phone to check what Vanessa was posting. forgetting that I had been locked out of her world. Friends started sending me screenshots of her content, which somehow made it worse. She was posting more than ever, long captions about authenticity and surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. There were subtle digs about family members who don't understand your journey, about having to make hard choices to protect your energy. What stung the most was seeing our childhood photos, the ones she still posted on Throwback Thursday. Pictures of us at Lake Powell building sandcastles in Rocky Point, dressed up for Halloween. She would caption them with things like missing the simple times before life got complicated, or grateful for the lessons every relationship teaches us. She was rewriting our history in real time, turning me into a cautionary tale about outgrowing people who no longer serve your highest good. I tried to focus on my work, on building my own freelance business, designing logos and websites for small businesses around Phoenix. But it was hard to concentrate when I felt like I was being actively erased by someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Every notification made me hope it was Vanessa reaching out to explain, to apologize, to acknowledge that whatever I had done to upset her could be worked through like adults. Instead, I got a call from Aunt Linda on a Tuesday evening while I was heating up leftover Thai food. Linda was my dad's sister, the one family member who had never bought into the Vanessa worship that seemed to infect everyone else. She was a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital, practical and direct in a way that cut through emotional fog like a surgical instrument. "I saw the Instagram situation," she said without preamble. "Your mom told me Vanessa needed space from family drama." "There was no drama," I said, stabbing my pad thai with unnecessary force. "That's the crazy part. I literally have no idea what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong, Natalie. That's exactly the problem." Linda's words hung in the air like a challenge. "What do you mean? Your sister has built her entire brand around being perfect. Perfect relationship, perfect apartment, perfect spiritual journey, perfect family dynamic. You represent reality, and reality doesn't get engagement. But I've never called her out publicly. I've never tried to embarrass her. You don't have to. Your existence is enough. You're her sister, which means people who follow her know she has real family with real problems and real history. You're a reminder that her life isn't actually as curated as she pretends it is." I sat down on my couch, the weight of Linda's words settling over me like a heavy blanket. "So what am I supposed to do? Just accept being erased?" "You could," Linda said carefully, "or you could stop trying to be invisible for her comfort." That night I lay awake thinking about Linda's words. I had spent so many years trying to be the easy sister, the one who didn't cause problems or demand attention. When Vanessa started her social media career 3 years ago, I had quietly stepped back, making sure I wasn't in the background of her photos looking less than perfect, avoiding her events so I wouldn't accidentally photobomb her content. I had made myself smaller and smaller, thinking I was being supportive, when really I was just enabling her to pretend I didn't exist. The breaking point came 2 weeks later at our cousin Jake's wedding in downtown Phoenix. I had been looking forward to the event for months, excited to celebrate family and catch up with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa was in the wedding party, resplendent in her dusty rose bridesmaid dress, posing for what seemed like hundreds of photos with the other bridesmaids, the groomsmen, the flower arrangements, the venue's architectural detail. I was sitting at our family table with my parents and Uncle Mike when Vanessa approached, her phone already out and angled for the perfect shot. "Family photo time," she announced brightly, gesturing for everyone to gather around. She positioned our parents in the center, Uncle Mike to the side, and started directing the pose like she was Annie Leibovitz shooting for Vogue. "Natalie, could you step out for a second?" she asked without looking at me. "The lighting is weird with too many people." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "What? Just for this shot? I want to get a good one for my stories, and you know how harsh these reception lights can be." Our mother opened her mouth like she was going to object, then closed it again. Uncle Mike looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The photographer, who had been waiting patiently, shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. "You want me to step out of the family photo?" I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "It's not personal. It's just aesthetic. I'll tag everyone anyway." Something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. No, Vanessa blinked, her influencer smile faltering slightly. What? I said no. I'm not stepping out of a family photo because you think I'll mess up your content. Natalie, don't be dramatic. It's one picture. It's never one picture with you, Vanessa. It's blocking me on social media so your followers don't know you have a sister who isn't part of your brand. It's making comments about my apartment being too small for your aesthetic. It's 25 years of making me feel like I need to apologize for existing in your vicinity. People at nearby tables were starting to notice the tension. Vanessa's jaw tightened as she realized we were creating the kind of scene that definitely wouldn't make it into her highlight reel. We can talk about this later, she said through gritted teeth, her smile snapping back into place for the benefit of any potential cameras. No, we can't, because you've blocked me on every platform and told Mom I'm being negative for asking why. The photographer cleared his throat. Should I come back in a few minutes? That won't be necessary, I said, standing up from the table. I'll save everyone the trouble. I walked away from that wedding feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't the one apologizing or backing down or making myself smaller. I had drawn a line, and it felt solid under my feet. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my dad. Your sister is very upset about last night. She says you embarrassed her in front of Brad's family. Maybe you should call her. I deleted the text without responding. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I started paying attention to what Vanessa was actually posting. Not as her sister but as an outside observer. I created a fake Instagram account under the name Riley Martinez and requested to follow her. She accepted within hours, probably excited about gaining another potential customer for her coaching services. What I found was more disturbing than I had expected. Vanessa wasn't just curating her content, she was fabricating entire narratives. She posted about morning meditation sessions that I knew for a fact she didn't do, because she had always been the type to hit snooze 5 times and rush out the door. She shared inspirational quotes about overcoming childhood trauma when our childhood had been overwhelmingly privileged and stable. She talked about her journey of healing from toxic family patterns, while posting throwback photos of the very family she was supposedly recovering from. But the most unsettling discovery was her recent pivot toward relationship coaching. She was offering one-on-one sessions to help women identify red flags and boundary violations in their personal relationships. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I screenshotted everything, not because I had a plan but because something told me I might need evidence of the gap between her public persona and private behavior. Then I started digging deeper, using the research skills I had developed in college and refined through years of freelance work that required understanding client businesses inside and out. That's when I found the Maricopa County court record. It was late on a Thursday night, and I had been going down a rabbit hole of trying to understand how Vanessa's business was structured. She claimed to be a certified life coach, but I couldn't find any legitimate certification body that had her name in their registry. I was searching public business filings when I stumbled across something that made me sit up straighter in my desk chair. Vanessa Brooks had been arrested 18 months ago for shoplifting at a Nordstrom in Scottsdale, not just a small item either. According to the police report, which was public record, she had attempted to steal over $800 worth of clothing and accessories. The case had been resolved through community service and restitution, probably sealed through some kind of diversion program that kept it off her permanent record but didn't erase it from public court filings. The arrest had happened right around the time she started her major push into lifestyle coaching, when she was posting daily about abundance mindset and attracting prosperity through positive thinking. While she was telling her followers that the universe rewards authenticity and good intentions, she was literally stealing designer clothes to maintain the image of success that her brand required. I stared at the court documents for a long time, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the sister who had blocked me for being bad for her image, who had asked me to step out of family photos, who had convinced our parents that I was the source of negativity in her perfectly curated life. And she was hiding a criminal record from the same followers she claimed to help with their own authenticity journeys. The irony was devastating. Here was a woman building a career on teaching others how to live authentically while maintaining one of the most inauthentic public personas I had ever encountered. She was charging women $200 an hour to help them identify manipulation and dishonesty in their relationships while actively manipulating and deceiving her own audience. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all the times she had made me feel like I was the problem, like my presence in her life was something to be managed or hidden. I thought about the family photo at Jake's wedding, about being blocked from her social media accounts, about our mother's casual suggestion that I should be more supportive of Vanessa's important work. By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to expose her out of spite or revenge. I was going to expose her because her followers deserved to know who they were taking advice from. Women were paying her significant money for guidance on authenticity and healthy relationships while she actively demonstrated the opposite of those values. I spent the weekend carefully documenting everything I had found: the court records, the screenshots of her contradictory content, the business filings that showed discrepancies in her claimed credentials. I cross-referenced her posts about meditation and self-care with the timeline of her legal troubles, noting how her most preachy content about honesty and integrity had been posted during the exact period when she was dealing with criminal charges. Then I waited. Vanessa had announced a big virtual event for the following Friday, a free masterclass about clearing toxic energy from your inner circle, where she planned to promote her new high-ticket coaching program. She had been building anticipation for weeks, promising to share her most transformative insights about identifying and removing negative influences from your life. It was perfect time. She was literally going to teach people how to identify dishonest, manipulative people while hiding her own dishonesty and manipulation. I couldn't have scripted better irony if I had tried. The Wednesday before her event, I created a simple website using my graphic design skill. I called it The Real Vanessa Brooks, and laid out everything I had discovered in a clean, professional format: court documents, business registration discrepancies, screenshots showing the contradiction between her public teachings and private behavior. I made sure everything was factual and verifiable, citing sources and providing links to public records. Then I waited for Friday night, when 5,000 women would tune in to learn about authenticity from someone who had built her career on the exact opposite. Friday evening arrived with the kind of desert heat that made the air shimmer like a mirage. I sat in my apartment with all the curtains drawn, laptop open, watching the registration numbers climb on Vanessa's masterclass landing page. 4,893 people had signed up to learn about clearing toxic energy from their inner circles. The irony was so thick, it could have been bottled and sold as a supplement. My phone had been buzzing all day with notifications I was ignoring: text messages from family members, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, even a voicemail from Brad asking if I could call him back about something important. I let them all go unanswered. Tonight was about more than family drama or sibling rivalry. Tonight was about truth. At 7:30 I opened Vanessa's livestream link and watched her appear on screen in what looked like a professionally designed studio space. She had clearly rented time at one of those content creation facilities in Scottsdale, the kind with perfect lighting and branded backdrops that made everything look like a magazine shoot. She wore a flowing white blouse that caught the light just right, her hair styled in loose waves that probably took 2 hours to achieve but looked effortlessly perfect. "Welcome, beautiful souls," she began, her voice carrying that carefully practiced cadence that social media coaches all seem to adopt. "I am so incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your Friday evening with me, investing in your highest self and your most authentic relationship." I watched her smile into the camera, that same smile she had perfected over years of family photos and school presentations. Growing up, I had always admired how easily Vanessa could command a room, how she never seemed nervous or uncertain the way I did. Now I understood that confidence differently. It wasn't fearlessness, it was performance art. "Before we dive deep tonight, I want to share something vulnerable with all of you," Vanessa continued, settling back in her chair like she was about to reveal state secret. "This past year has been the most challenging of my life. I've had to make some really difficult decisions about the people in my inner circle. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who resist our growth the hardest." The chat window exploded with supportive comments, heart emojis, fire symbols, Messages of solidarity from women who clearly saw themselves in her narrative. This is so brave. Thank you for being real with us. Family trauma is the hardest to heal from. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized what she was doing. This wasn't just a coaching session about identifying toxic people in general. This was going to be a masterclass in how to position yourself as the victim, while systematically destroying someone else's reputation. She was about to weaponize our relationship for content, turning our private family dynamics into teachable moments for her audience. The hardest lesson I've learned, Vanessa said, her voice taking on that tremulous quality that suggested she was barely holding back tears, is that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually projecting their own insecurities and limitations onto your success. They might say they're being supportive, but their energy tells a different story. More supportive comments flooded the chat. Women sharing their own stories of family members who didn't understand their entrepreneurial journeys, friends who became jealous of their success, partners who tried to dim their light. Vanessa was building a collective narrative, where anyone who questioned or challenged her was automatically labeled as toxic, projecting, or threatened by her growth. I want to be really transparent with you about something, she continued, and I found myself leaning forward despite everything. I recently had to make the decision to create boundaries with a family member who was consistently undermining my work and my message. This person would make little comments designed to make me question myself, to make me smaller, to keep me playing at their level instead of rising to mine. I stared at the screen, recognizing the shape of our relationship through her distorted lens. My occasional teasing about her overly staged photos had become consistent undermining. My questions about her credentials had become attempts to make her smaller. My refusal to disappear from family photos had become evidence of my toxic energy. The turning point came, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, when this person tried to humiliate me at a family event, in front of people I love, in front of people who were celebrating a beautiful moment. This family member chose to make a scene about not being included in something that had nothing to do with them, the wedding. She was talking about Jake's wedding, but from a perspective so warped I barely recognized the event I had attended. In her version, I had made a scene about not being included, rather than refusing to be excluded. She had flipped the entire narrative, making herself the victim of my selfishness, rather than acknowledging that she had asked her own sister to step out of a family photo. I want you to understand something, gorgeous humans, Vanessa continued, and now there were actual tears glittering in her eyes. When someone tries to sabotage your joy, when they can't celebrate your wins, when they make everything about their own pain and insecurity, that's not love, that's emotional manipulation. And you don't have to tolerate it just because you share DNA. The chat was going wild now. Hundreds of women thanking her for giving them permission to cut off toxic family members, sharing their own stories of siblings who didn't support their dreams, praising her courage for choosing herself over obligation. She had turned our private conflict into a public validation session, and her audience was eating it up like starved people at a buffet. I felt something shift inside me as I watched her perform our relationship for strangers. This wasn't just about social media blocking anymore, or even about the criminal record I had discovered. This was about something deeper and more disturbing. Vanessa was willing to publicly destroy her own sister's reputation to build her brand, to turn family pain into profit, to weaponize the most intimate details of our shared history for content. Now I want to teach you some practical tools for identifying these patterns in your own life, she said, transitioning smoothly into the main content of her masterclass. Because here's what I've learned: toxic people often disguise their manipulation as concern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They'll say they're just being honest, or they're trying to protect you, or they're worried about your choices. But what they're really doing is trying to control your narrative. The presentation slides began, each one more polished than the last. Signs of emotional manipulation, red flags in family dynamics. How to create healthy boundaries with people who don't respect your growth. She had turned our entire relationship into a case study, using me as the perfect example of every toxic behavior she was teaching her audience to avoid. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the website I had built. The real Vanessa Brooks sat there waiting, every court document properly cited, every screenshot timestamped and verified. I had spent days making sure everything was factual and legally sound. This wasn't about revenge or retaliation. This was about accountability. For 45 minutes, I watched Vanessa teach 5,000 women how to identify dishonesty and manipulation, while actively demonstrating both. She talked about the importance of authenticity while maintaining a completely fabricated public persona. She discussed red flags in relationships while exhibiting every red flag behavior she was warning against. When she opened the chat for questions during the final 15 minutes, I was ready. Using my Riley Martinez account, I typed a simple question. Hi Vanessa. Love your content. Quick question though. How do you reconcile teaching about authenticity when you have a criminal record for shoplifting that you've never disclosed to your followers? Asking for a friend who found the Maricopa County court documents online. The question appeared in the chat feed along with dozens of others asking about her coaching packages and certification credentials. For a moment I wasn't sure she had seen it. She continued answering softball questions about morning routines and meditation practices, her smile never wavering. Then the chat began to shift. Other people had seen my question and were starting to ask follow-up questions. Wait, what court documents? Is this true? Can someone drop a link? I watched Vanessa's eyes move to her secondary monitor, where she was undoubtedly reading the chat feed. Her smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that most people probably missed it. But I had grown up watching that face, and I knew the exact expression she made when she was caught off guard. I want to address something that just came up in the chat, she said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. Sometimes when you're doing important work in the world, people will try to discredit you with lies and misinformation. This is actually a perfect example of the toxic behavior we've been discussing tonight. But the chat was moving too fast now for her to control. Someone had found my website and dropped the link. Others were copying and pasting portions of the court documents. The supportive heart emojis were being replaced by question marks and shocked face emojis. Let me be very clear, Vanessa said, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack around the edges. These accusations are completely false, and they're coming from someone with a personal vendetta against my success. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I was just teaching you to recognize. I typed another message. Here's the direct link to the Maricopa County Superior Court database. Case number CR22, Vanessa Brooks, arrested for shoplifting $84 worth of merchandise from Nordstrom Scottsdale on March 15, 2022. Right around the time she started posting about abundance mindset, the chat was chaos now. Some people were defending Vanessa, saying everyone deserved redemption and past mistakes didn't define you. Others were expressing shock and betrayal, pointing out that she had been teaching authenticity while hiding criminal behavior. A few were noting the irony that she was building a career on helping people identify red flags while exhibiting them herself. I'm going to end tonight's session here, Vanessa announced abruptly, her professional mask slipping completely. Thank you so much for joining me, beautiful soul. Remember, not everyone will understand your journey, and that's okay. Keep shining your light even when others try to dim it. The screen went black. 5,000 people had just watched a lifestyle coach's carefully constructed image crumble in real time. I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. My phone started ringing immediately. First my mom, then Brad, then numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all and opened my laptop to check the analytics on my website. The traffic was exploding. People weren't just reading the court documents, they were digging deeper, finding other inconsistencies in Vanessa's public story. Someone had discovered that her claimed certification from the International Coaching Federation was fabricated. Another person found business registration documents, showing she had never actually filed the proper paperwork to operate as a licensed coaching business in Arizona. The crowdsourced investigation was revealing a pattern of deception that went far beyond a single shoplifting arrest. I felt my phone buzz with a text message from Aunt Linda, watching the drama unfold online. Are you okay? Also, remind me never to get on your bad side. I smiled for the first time in weeks, and typed back, I'm better than okay. I'm free. The next morning brought a different kind of chaos. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from family members demanding explanations or expressing outrage that I had aired our dirty laundry in public. A few were from strangers who had found my personal information online and wanted to thank me for exposing what they called obvious fraud. But the message that stopped me cold came from an unexpected source: Jake, our cousin whose wedding had been the scene of my final confrontation with Vanessa. Nat, I need to tell you something. Vanessa asked me not to invite you to my wedding. She said you were going through a difficult time and might cause drama. Sarah and I decided to invite you anyway because you're family, but I thought you should know. What you did last night took guts. She's been bulldozing people for years, and someone needed to call her out. I stared at the message, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Vanessa hadn't just blocked me on social media or asked me to step out of one photo. She had been actively trying to isolate me from extended family, using concern for my well-being as a cover for protecting her image. How many other events had she tried to exclude me from? How many other relatives had she convinced that I was unstable or difficult? The realization hit me like cold water. This wasn't about sibling rivalry or even social media image management. This was about control. Vanessa had been systematically working to erase me from our family narrative, positioning herself as the stable, successful sister, while painting me as the problematic one who needed to be managed or avoided. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a 602 area code. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Is this Natalie Brooks? The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. Yes. Who is this? My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Republic. I've been following the story about your sister that broke last night, and I was wondering if you might be interested in doing an interview. I sat down hard on my couch. An interview. We've been investigating claims of business fraud among unlicensed coaches and consultants in the Phoenix area. Your sister's case has several elements that fit a pattern we've been tracking: false credentials, undisclosed criminal history, potential financial fraud through coaching service. We'd like to understand more about how these operations affect families and communities. I don't know if I want to get into a public battle with my sister, I said carefully. I understand, and I respect, but I think you should know that you're not the only person who has come forward about Vanessa Brooks. We've been contacted by several former clients who paid significant money for coaching services based on credentials she doesn't actually possess. One woman paid $5,000 for a 3-month program that was supposed to be led by a certified trauma specialist. When she tried to verify Vanessa's credentials for insurance reimbursement, she discovered the certification was completely fake. My stomach dropped. I had been focused on the shoplifting charge and the way Vanessa had manipulated our family dynamics. I hadn't considered that her lies might be actively harming vulnerable people who were seeking legitimate help. There are at least 6 women have contacted our newsroom since last night. They're all asking similar questions about refunds and potential legal action. Your website documentation has been crucial in helping them understand the scope of the deception. I walked to my window and looked out at the desert landscape, the mountains rising purple and stark against the morning sky. 24 hours ago, I had been focused on protecting myself from my sister's digital erasure. Now I was learning that her deception went far beyond family dynamics. She was taking money from women seeking genuine help for serious issues, providing unlicensed services while posing as a qualified professional. What would an interview involve? I asked. Just a conversation about your experience with your sister's business practices and how they affected your family. We'd want to verify some of the timeline around when she started making false claims about her credentials. Nothing about your personal relationship beyond what's already public. Can I think about it? Of course. But Natalie, I want you to know that what you did last night was important. These kinds of operations thrive in silence. When family members and former clients are afraid to speak up, people like your sister can continue taking advantage of vulnerable people indefinitely. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about the women who had paid Vanessa thousands of dollars for help with trauma and relationship issues. I thought about the trust they had placed in someone who presented herself as qualified to guide them through their healing. I thought about the damage that could be done when someone seeking legitimate mental health support instead received guidance from a person with no training, no oversight, and apparently no ethical boundary. My phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Thank you for speaking up about Vanessa Brooks. I paid her $3,000 for trauma coaching last year. She told me she was a licensed therapist. Finding out she has no credentials and a criminal record is devastating. But I'm grateful to finally understand why her advice felt so off. You probably saved me from continuing to trust someone who was completely unqualified to help me." I read the message 3 times, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. This wasn't about family drama anymore. This was about accountability, about protecting other people from being deceived and potentially harmed by someone using fake credentials and manufactured authority. I texted Carmen Rodriguez back. "When can we schedule that interview?" The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of phone calls, research, and slowly emerging revelations about the scope of Vanessa's deception. The Arizona Republic was building a comprehensive story about unlicensed coaching operations, and Vanessa's case was becoming a central example. Other former clients came forward with stories of paying significant money for services that were supposed to be provided by a licensed professional, only to discover later that no such license existed. But the most disturbing revelation came on Sunday evening, when I received a call from a woman named Jennifer who had found my contact information through the reporter. "I need to tell someone this," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "I was in your sister's coaching program last spring. I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship, and I was dealing with severe anxiety and depression. Vanessa told me she was qualified to help with trauma recovery." "I'm so sorry," I said, not sure what else to offer. "She convinced me to stop taking my medication. She said anxiety and depression were just symptoms of being disconnected from my authentic self, and that pharmaceuticals were blocking my natural healing process. She said if I trusted her process completely, I wouldn't need medication anymore." My blood went cold. "You stopped taking prescribed medication because she told you to?" "I ended up in the hospital 3 weeks later, panic attacks so severe I thought I was dying. My doctor was furious when I told him what had happened. He said people without medical training should never ever advise someone to stop taking psychiatric medication." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. Vanessa had not only been posing as a licensed therapist, she had been giving medical advice that could have seriously harmed or even killed someone. "Jennifer, have you reported this to anyone? To the police, or medical boards, or licensing authority?" I tried, but since she's not actually licensed by any legitimate body, there's no professional organization to report her to. She exists in this gray area where she's not technically practicing medicine, just calling herself a coach. But she was giving advice that only medical professionals should give. After I hung up with Jennifer, I called Carmen Rodriguez immediately. "We need to expand this story," I told her. "It's not just about fake credentials. She's been giving medical advice to vulnerable people. Someone could have died." "We're already looking into that angle," Carmen said grimly. "Jennifer wasn't the first person to contact us about medical advice. We're working with medical ethicists and legal experts to understand the regulatory gaps that allow this kind of harm to happen." That night, I lay awake thinking about all the ways I had underestimated the situation. I had been focused on being erased from family photos and blocked on social media, treating this like a personal conflict about favoritism and image management. But while I was feeling sorry for myself about digital exile, Vanessa had been building a business that actively endangered vulnerable people seeking help. The guilt was overwhelming. How many women had been harmed while I stayed quiet about her lack of credentials? How many people had trusted her with their mental health, their trauma, their most vulnerable moments, while I focused on my own hurt feelings about being excluded from her curated image? I thought about all the times over the past year when I could have spoken up, could have researched her claims, could have asked harder questions about her qualifications. Instead, I had been so focused on trying to maintain family peace that I had enabled her to continue deceiving people who were counting on her for legitimate help. Monday morning brought news that changed everything. Carmen Rodriguez called me at 7 a.m. with an update that made my stomach drop. "The Arizona Attorney General's office is opening an investigation," she said. Consumer fraud, practicing without a license, and potentially criminal endangerment related to the medical advice issue. This is going to be a criminal case, not just a civil matter. I sat down hard on my kitchen floor, my coffee mug forgotten on the counter. Criminal charges, multiple felony counts, possibly. The state takes unlicensed practice very seriously, especially when it involves vulnerable populations and medical advice. Jennifer wasn't the only person who was told to stop taking medication. We've found at least 4 other women with similar experiences. What does this mean for the family? It means your sister is going to be facing serious legal consequences that go far beyond anything you or your family can control. This isn't about sibling rivalry anymore, Natalie. This is about public safety. After I hung up, I sat in my empty apartment thinking about how completely the situation had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. 3 days ago, my biggest concern was being blocked on Instagram. Now I was facing the reality that my sister was likely going to be arrested for multiple felonies, and that my decision to expose her shoplifting record had set in motion a chain of events that would probably destroy her life. Part of me felt guilty, part of me felt responsible, but a larger part of me felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in my adult life, Vanessa was going to face real consequences for her behavior. She wasn't going to be able to charm her way out of this, or manipulate the narrative to make herself the victim. The truth was bigger than her ability to control it. My phone rang. It was my mother, and for the first time in days, I answered. "Natalie, what have you done?" Patricia's voice was strained, desperate. "Your sister is talking about leaving the state. She says you've ruined her life." I exposed the truth about her criminal record and fake credentials. "Mom, everything else is just consequences. She made a mistake with the shoplifting, yes, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy her career. Her career was based on lying to vulnerable people and potentially endangering their health. This isn't about punishment, it's about protecting other people from being harmed. She's your sister, Natalie. She's family." I looked around my small apartment, at the life I had built quietly and honestly, without fanfare or fake credentials or manufactured drama. Family doesn't erase each other to protect their image, Mom. Family doesn't ask you to step out of photos because you don't match their brand. And family definitely doesn't build a business on deceiving people who are seeking help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I don't know how to fix this," Patricia finally said, and for the first time I could remember, she sounded genuinely lost. "You don't fix it, Mom. You let it play out. You let Vanessa face the consequences of her choices, and you stop trying to protect her from accountability." "But what about our family? What about Christmas and holidays, and family gatherings?" I thought about Jake's wedding, about being asked to step out of family photos, about being systematically excluded from social media and potentially other family events. "What family gatherings, Mom? I've already been erased from most of them." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete honesty about our family dynamic. There was no more pretending that the favoritism didn't exist, no more making excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, no more accepting blame for reactions to treatment that was genuinely harmful. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the problem that needed to be managed. I was just a person who had finally decided to stop being complicit in protecting someone else's lies. The truth was ugly and complicated and was going to hurt people I love, but it was still the truth, and it was finally louder than all the carefully constructed stories that had been drowning it out for years. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, while I was working on a logo design for a local bakery. Unknown number, but something made me answer it anyway. "Natalie, it's Brad." My sister's fiancé sounded exhausted, his usually confident pharmaceutical sales voice cracked and uncertain. We had never spoken one-on-one in the 3 years they had been together. Vanessa had always orchestrated their social interactions, like a carefully choreographed performance, keeping Brad positioned as the supportive partner who validated her choices without question. "Hi Brad, how are you holding up? Can we meet somewhere? I need to talk to someone who actually knows Vanessa, and right now you're the only person who might give me a straight answer."
2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from him at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix, watching him stir sugar into his Americano with hands that shook slightly. Brad looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of caffeine was going to fix. "I had no idea," he said without preamble, "about any of it. The arrest, the fake credentials, the medical advice. I thought she was actually licensed. I've been telling people at work that my fiancé is a trauma specialist." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or willful ignorance.
Brad had always struck me as someone who preferred surface-level interactions, the type of person who would rather not dig too deep into uncomfortable truths. But the shock in his expression seemed genuine. "She never mentioned the shoplifting arrest?" "Never. When we started dating, she told me she had overcome some family trauma and had built a successful coaching practice to help other women do the same. She showed me testimonials, client success stories, certificates on her wall. I never thought to verify any of it." "What certificates?" Brad pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos. "She has this whole wall in her home office. Look." The image showed an impressive display of framed documents, certificates from the International Coaching Federation, a trauma specialist credential from something called the American Institute for Healing Arts, even what appeared to be a master's degree in psychology from Arizona State University. They looked official, professional, legitimate. "Did you ever look closely at these?" "Why would I? I mean, who fakes educational credentials? That seemed crazy paranoid." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "But yesterday I drove over to her apartment to check. Natalie, they're all fake, printed on regular paper, not even good fakes. The ASU degree has spelling errors. The psychology program she claims to have graduated from doesn't even exist." I felt a chill run down my spine. The level of deception was staggering. Vanessa hadn't just exaggerated her qualifications or stretched the truth about her training. She had created an entirely fabricated professional identity, complete with fake documentation to support her lies. "How long have you known her?" 3 years. We met at a networking event for wellness professionals. She was giving a presentation about trauma-informed coaching approaches. She seemed so knowledgeable, so passionate about helping people heal. Everything she said made sense. "And you never saw any red flag?" Brad was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup like it might contain answers. "There were things that seemed off, but I explained them away. She would get really defensive if I asked specific questions about her training or her method. She said the therapeutic relationship was sacred, and she couldn't discuss client work, even in general terms." That actually sounds reasonable. It did at the time, but looking back, I think she was just avoiding conversations where her lack of actual knowledge would become obvious. He looked up at me with something close to desperation. "The worst part is that I referred people to her. My coworker's wife was struggling with postpartum depression, and I told her Vanessa was a licensed trauma specialist who could help. This woman paid $3,000 for a program that was supposed to address maternal mental health issues." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" Vanessa told her that postpartum depression was just a lack of connection to her divine feminine energy. She prescribed meditation, essential oils, and something called emotional release journaling. She told this woman that antidepressants would block her natural healing process, and that she needed to trust the wisdom of her body. Oh God. The woman ended up having a complete breakdown. She's in intensive outpatient therapy now, working with actual licensed professionals, to address both the original postpartum depression and the additional trauma of being convinced that her mental illness was a spiritual failing. I sat back in my chair, feeling the full weight of what Vanessa had been doing. This wasn't just about fake credentials or inflated marketing claims. She had been actively harming people, giving dangerous advice about serious mental health conditions, while posing as a qualified professional. "Brad, have you talked to the Attorney General's office? They need to know about this." "I called yesterday. They said they're building a case and that my testimony about the fake credentials would be helpful." "But Natalie, there's something else." He pulled a folder from his messenger bag and slid it across the table. I've been going through Vanessa's business records. She gave me access to her accounts when we got engaged, for financial planning purposes. I never really looked at them carefully before, but now I opened the folder and felt my breath catch. Bank statements, payment records, client communications. Vanessa had been charging premium rates for her coaching services, positioning herself as a luxury provider for high-achieving women dealing with complex trauma. Some clients had paid $10,000 or more for multi-month programs. "Look at this client," Brad said, pointing to a series of payments from someone identified only as M.H., $15,000 over 6 months. According to her intake notes, this woman was dealing with childhood sexual abuse and relationship trauma. Vanessa convinced her to leave her therapist and psychiatrist to work exclusively with her. The intake notes were chilling to read. Vanessa had diagnosed this client with complex PTSD, attachment disorders, and something she called inherited trauma pattern. She had prescribed a treatment plan that included cutting contact with supportive family members, discontinuing medication, and participating in what she called breakthrough healing sessions that cost additional fees. "This is medical practice without a license," I said, scanning through more documents. "She's diagnosing mental health conditions and prescribing treatment protocols. This goes way beyond life coaching." "I know. And there are dozens of clients like this. Women who were convinced to leave their actual mental health providers to work with someone who had no qualifications whatsoever." I kept reading, feeling sicker with each page. Vanessa had been systematically targeting vulnerable women, using sophisticated marketing and fake credentials to position herself as an expert in trauma recovery. She had created treatment plans, assigned diagnoses, and made medical recommendations while having no training, no supervision, and no accountability to any licensing board. "Why are you showing me this?" Brad looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Because I think you're the only person who might be able to help me understand how she became this person. I've been trying to figure out if she actually believes her own lies, or if she knows she's been deliberately deceiving people." It was a question I had been wrestling with myself. The Vanessa I grew up with had always been self-centered and image-obsessed, but I had never seen her as deliberately malicious. She was someone who bent the truth to serve her narrative, not someone who would knowingly endanger people's lives. "I think she started believing her own story," I said slowly. "She's always been good at convincing herself that whatever she wanted was justified. If she needed credentials to build her business, then she deserved to have credentials. If people were willing to pay premium rates for her advice, then her advice must be valuable. But how do you go from believing you're qualified to actively telling people to stop taking medication?" I thought about our childhood, about the way Vanessa had always been able to convince adults that she was more mature and responsible than she actually was. Teachers, coaches, family friends, they all saw her as this exceptional young woman who just needed opportunities to shine. She had learned early that confidence and presentation could often substitute for actual competence. She's been rewarded her whole life for performing expertise, even when she didn't have it. Our parents, teachers, everyone around her treated her like she was naturally gifted at understanding people and solving problems. I think she genuinely believes that her intuition and natural abilities are equivalent to professional training. But people could have died. That woman with postpartum depression, the clients who were told to stop taking psychiatric medication. How do you rationalize that level of harm? I didn't have a good answer. The Vanessa I knew was selfish and manipulative, but I had never thought of her as someone who would knowingly put people in danger. Either I had fundamentally misunderstood who my sister was, or she had evolved into someone much more dangerous than I had realized. Maybe she convinced herself that traditional mental health treatment was actually harmful, I said, grasping for explanations that might make sense. There's a whole movement of people who believe that medication and therapy are just ways to keep people dependent on the medical system. If she bought into that ideology, she might have genuinely thought she was helping people by encouraging them to reject conventional treatment. Or maybe she just didn't care about anything beyond building her brand and making money. We sat in silence for a while, both struggling with the implications of what we were discovering. I had spent weeks feeling angry about being erased from Vanessa's social media presence, but that seemed trivial compared to learning that she had been operating an unlicensed mental health practice that actively endangered vulnerable people. What are you going to do? I'm calling off the engagement. I can't marry someone who has been lying to me about fundamental aspects of who they are, but beyond that, I don't know. We have a venue booked, deposits paid, invitations already sent. Our wedding is supposed to be in 6 weeks. The practical implications were staggering. Brad and Vanessa had been planning what was meant to be a high-profile wedding at a resort in Sedona. Vanessa had been documenting every aspect of the planning process on social media, turning their engagement into content that promoted her brand as a relationship expert who had found her perfect match. She's been using our relationship for her business, Brad continued, echoing my thought. Post about healthy relationship dynamics, how to attract your ideal partner, the spiritual significance of finding your twin flame. I thought she was just excited about getting married, but now I realize it was all marketing material. Have you talked to her about any of this? She says the criminal charges are a misunderstanding, that her credentials are legitimate, but under review by certification boards, that the medical advice allegations are being blown out of proportion by people who don't understand her holistic approach. Do you believe her? God, I want to believe that this is all some terrible misunderstanding and that the woman I fell in love with actually exists. But the evidence is overwhelming, Natalie, the fake certificates, the client files, the medical advice. It's all real. My phone buzzed with a text message from Carmen Rodriguez. Major development. Can you call me as soon as possible? I showed the message to Brad. I need to take this. The reporter who's been covering the story has been tracking down more victims. Wait, Brad said as I started to stand. There's something else you need to know. Vanessa isn't just angry about the exposure. She's scared. Really scared. Yesterday she asked me if I thought she should leave the country. Leave the country? She's been researching extradition laws and looking at countries that don't have formal agreements with the United States. I think she knows how serious the charges are going to be. I stared at him, trying to process the idea that my sister was considering fleeing the country to avoid prosecution for her crimes. The Vanessa I knew was dramatic and self-centered, but she had never been someone who ran from consequence. The fact that she was considering international flight suggested she understood the gravity of what she had done in a way that terrified her. You need to tell the Attorney General's office about that immediately, I said. If she's a flight risk, they might need to take action to prevent her from leaving. After Brad left, I called Carmen Rodriguez from my car in the coffee shop parking lot. We found her, Carmen said without preamble. The woman who died. My blood went cold. What do you mean? Margaret Harrison, 53 years old, mother of 2. She was in Vanessa's coaching program last year. Severe depression following her divorce, complicated by anxiety and what her actual therapist had diagnosed as complex PTSD from childhood abuse. I sat in stunned silence, waiting for Carmen to continue. Margaret had been stable on medication and working with a licensed therapist for 2 years. Then she found Vanessa's program and was convinced to stop both the medication and therapy. Vanessa told her that her depression was actually repressed anger at her ex-husband, and that she needed to process it through intensive emotional release work rather than numbing it with pharmaceuticals. Oh God. Margaret stopped taking her antidepressants and broke contact with her therapist. 3 weeks later, she took her own life. Her family is suing Vanessa for wrongful death, but it's been difficult to pursue because she's not licensed by any professional body that could be held accountable. I felt like I was going to throw up. A woman was dead because my sister had convinced her to abandon legitimate mental health treatment in favor of unlicensed coaching services. This wasn't just about fake credentials or financial fraud anymore. This was about a preventable death that had occurred because Vanessa had positioned herself as qualified to treat serious mental illness. Carmen, this changes everything. This isn't just consumer fraud. This is negligent homicide. We know. The Attorney General's office is expediting their investigation. They're treating this as a potential manslaughter case now. What does that mean for Vanessa? If they can prove that her unlicensed practice directly contributed to Margaret's death, she could be facing decades in prison. This is no longer a white-collar crime case. This is a death that might have been prevented if she hadn't interfered with legitimate medical treatment. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to process what I had learned. Margaret Harrison had been someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's friend. She had been struggling with legitimate mental health issues and had sought help from someone she believed was qualified to provide it. Instead, she had encountered my sister, who had convinced her to abandon the treatment that was keeping her stable. I thought about all the times I had complained about Vanessa's favoritism, her attention-seeking behavior, her tendency to make everything about herself. Those complaints seemed petty and meaningless now. While I had been focused on feeling excluded from family photos, my sister had been building a business that would ultimately cost someone their life. The guilt was overwhelming. I had known Vanessa wasn't actually licensed. I had seen her exaggerate her qualifications and make claims about her expertise that seemed inflated, but I had treated it like typical sibling rivalry, like her tendency to embellish stories to make herself look better. I had never imagined that her lies were actively endangering people. How many times could I have spoken up? How many opportunities had I missed to question her credentials or challenge her claims? Margaret Harrison might still be alive if I had been brave enough to expose Vanessa's deception months or years earlier. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized. Aunt Linda. Natalie, honey, are you okay? Your mom called me about this reporter situation. I'm not okay, Linda. None of this is okay. Tell me what you need. I found myself crying for the first time since the whole situation had started. Not sad tears, but the kind of crying that happens when you realize that everything you thought you understood about your life has been wrong. I need to understand how I didn't see this, how I lived with her for 18 years, grew up in the same house, shared the same parents, and never realized she was capable of hurting people like this. Natalie, listen to me carefully. You are not responsible for your sister's choices. You were not obligated to police her behavior or investigate her business practices. She is an adult who made deliberate decisions to deceive people and provide services she was not qualified to provide. But I knew she was lying about some things. I knew she exaggerated her qualification. There's a difference between someone who embellishes their resume and someone who builds an entire business on fake credentials. You had no way of knowing that her lies were putting people in danger. Margaret Harrison is dead. Linda. A woman died because my sister convinced her to stop taking medication that was keeping her alive. And that is a tragedy that your sister will have to live with for the rest of her life. But it is not your fault, and it is not your responsibility to carry that guilt. Linda's words were comforting, but they didn't change the fundamental reality of the situation. My family was about to be destroyed by criminal charges and civil lawsuits. A woman was dead. Multiple other women had been harmed by receiving unlicensed mental health treatment from someone who had no training or accountability. What's going to happen to our family? I don't know, honey, but whatever happens, you did the right thing by exposing the truth. How many other people might have been harmed if you had stayed quiet? That evening, I received a call from an unlisted number that turned out to be Vanessa herself. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Natalie. Her voice was different, smaller and more fragile than I had ever heard it. The confident, polished tone she used for her coaching videos was completely gone. Vanessa, I need you to understand something. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I genuinely believed I was helping people. You convinced a woman to stop taking medication for severe depression. Vanessa, she's dead. I know about Margaret, but you don't understand the whole situation. She was already struggling, already unstable. Her ex-husband was abusive, her family was unsupported. I was trying to help her find her own strength instead of depending on pharmaceuticals that were just masking the real problems. I felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling I used to get when Vanessa would explain away her childhood behavior in ways that made me question my own memory. She was trying to rewrite the narrative, to position herself as a well-meaning healer who had been unfairly blamed for someone else's tragedy. You're not qualified to make decisions about psychiatric medication, Vanessa. You have no training, no license, no supervision. You had no right to give medical advice to anyone. I have intuitive gifts, Natalie. I have a natural ability to understand what people need for healing. Traditional therapy keeps people trapped in victim mentalities, instead of empowering them to transform their lives. You have fake certificates printed on regular paper, Vanessa. I've seen them. Brad showed me your entire office wall of fabricated credentials. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I needed those credentials to be taken seriously, she finally said. People wouldn't listen to my actual qualifications, so I created documents that reflected my true level of expertise. Your true level of expertise is zero, Vanessa. You have no training in mental health treatment. You have no education in trauma recovery. You have no qualifications beyond your own inflated sense of your abilities. You've always been jealous of my success. And there it was. The familiar deflection, the way she had always turned any criticism into evidence of my inadequacy or jealousy. Even now, facing criminal charges and civil lawsuits, even after someone had died as a result of her deception, she was trying to make this about my supposed envy of her achievements. Vanessa, a woman is dead. Multiple women have been harmed. This isn't about jealousy or family drama. This is about accountability for choices that have destroyed people's lives. I'm leaving, Natalie. Tonight. Can't stay here and be destroyed by people who don't understand what I was trying to accomplish. If you run, it will only make things worse. Things can't get worse. My business is destroyed. My reputation is ruined. Brad won't even speak to me. I have nothing left here. You have the opportunity to take responsibility for what you've done, to cooperate with the investigation and maybe help prevent other people from being harmed by unlicensed operators. I won't be anyone's scapegoat, Natalie. There are hundreds of life coaches and wellness practitioners doing exactly what I was doing. I'm just the one who got caught because my own sister decided to destroy me. She hung up before I could respond. I sat staring at my phone, realizing that I had just had what might be my last conversation with my sister for a very long time. Either she was going to flee the country and become a fugitive, or she was going to be arrested and face decades in prison for her crime. Either way, the sister I had grown up with, the person I had spent my entire life trying to understand and connect with, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look at a woman's death and see only her own victimization, someone who could face overwhelming evidence of harm and maintain that she had been trying to help. I called Carmen Rodriguez one more time. She's running. Vanessa just called me. She's leaving tonight. We'll alert the Attorney General's office immediately. Do you have any idea where she might go? No, but Brad mentioned that she had been researching extradition laws. She's been planning that. Within an hour, I received confirmation that the Attorney General's office had contacted federal authorities about Vanessa's potential flight, but by then, it was too late. Her apartment was empty, her car was gone, and her phone was no longer in service. My sister had vanished, leaving behind a trail of destroyed lives, grieving families, and questions that might never be answered. Margaret Harrison's children would grow up without their mother. Brad would have to rebuild his life after discovering that his entire relationship had been built on lies. Dozens of women would have to find new therapists to address not only their original trauma, but also the additional harm caused by trusting someone who was completely unqualified to help them. And I would have to live with the knowledge that while I had been focused on being excluded from family photos, my sister had been building a business that would ultimately cost someone their life. The truth was finally louder than all of Vanessa's carefully constructed story, but the price of that truth was higher than anyone should have had to pay. The federal marshals arrived at my apartment complex at 6:30 in the morning, their black SUVs cutting through the desert dawn like shadows against the pink-streaked sky. I watched from my bedroom window as they positioned themselves around the building, methodical and precise. When they knocked on my door, I was already dressed and had coffee brewing. Ms. Brooks, we're with the U.S. Marshals Service. We need to ask you some questions about your sister's whereabouts. Marshal Jennifer Chen was compact and professional, her partner a tall man named Rodriguez, who looked like he could bench press my car. They sat in my living room taking notes while I explained everything I knew about Vanessa's disappearance, which wasn't much beyond our final phone conversation 3 days earlier. Has she attempted to contact you since Tuesday evening? Chen asked. No. Nothing. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and she's deleted all her social media accounts. What about other family members? Parents, relatives, close friends? My parents are in complete denial. They think she's just taking a vacation to process everything. They don't believe she would actually flee. Rodriguez looked up from his notepad. In your opinion, based on knowing your sister, where might she go? I thought about it carefully. Vanessa had always been drawn to places that fit her carefully constructed image. Expensive resorts, photogenic locations, anywhere she could blend in with other wealthy Americans abroad. She's obsessed with Bali. She talks about it constantly, about how it's a place for spiritual transformation and healing. She's always said she wanted to do a yoga teacher training there. Any specific areas or connections in Bali? Kabud, maybe? She follows a bunch of wellness retreats and yoga studios there on Instagram. She's always posting about wanting to study with some guru, named Katot, who supposedly teaches authentic Balinese healing practices. Chen made more note. Will coordinate with international authorities. Ms. Brooks, I need to be clear about something. Your sister is now considered a fugitive from justice. If she contacts you, you're legally obligated to report it immediately. Any assistance in helping her evade capture could result in federal charges against you. After they left, I sat in my apartment feeling like I was living in someone else's life. 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern had been being blocked on Instagram. Now federal marshals were briefing me on my legal obligations regarding my fugitive sister, who was wanted for crimes that had resulted in someone's death. My phone rang constantly throughout the morning. Reporters, former clients of Vanessa's seeking information, distant relatives who had seen the news coverage and wanted to express their shock. I stopped answering after the 5th call from Phoenix TV stations, wanting interview. Around noon, Carmen Rodriguez called with an update that made my stomach drop. They found Margaret Harrison's intake documents in Vanessa's apartment, she said without preamble. The ones where Vanessa diagnosed her with complex PTSD and recommended discontinuing medication. She actually wrote that down. Full psychological evaluation, treatment plan, the works. Vanessa documented everything like she was a licensed clinician. Margaret's family is using these documents as evidence in their wrongful death lawsuit. What do the documents say? According to Vanessa's notes, Margaret was suffering from what she called pharmaceutical dependency syndrome and needed to wean off antidepressants to access her authentic emotional truth. She prescribed a treatment protocol that included cutting contact with anyone who supported Margaret's use of medication. The callousness was breathtaking. Vanessa had systematically isolated a vulnerable woman from her support system, convinced her to abandon legitimate medical treatment, and documented the entire process like it was standard clinical practice. Carmen, there's something else. The marshals were here this morning. They think she might have fled to Indonesia. That makes sense. Indonesia doesn't have an extradition treaty with the US for certain types of crimes. If she made it there before the federal warrant was issued, it could take years to get her back. The State Department would have to negotiate her return through diplomatic channels. It's not impossible, but it's complicated and time-consuming. She might have researched this possibility thoroughly. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about all the times Vanessa had talked about Bali as her dream destination. I had always assumed it was typical social media wanderlust, the kind of exotic location that looked good in Instagram posts. Now I wondered if she had been planning an escape route for longer than anyone realized. That afternoon brought news that changed everything. Brad called me from what sounded like a parking lot, cars rushing past in the background. Nettily, she didn't go to Bali. What do you mean? I've been going through our shared credit card statements, trying to figure out how much money she had access to when she left. She didn't fly anywhere international. She drove to Mexico. There's a charge at a gas station in Nogales from Wednesday morning, about 6 hours after she called you, then another one in Hermosillo that same evening. She's driving south through Mexico. I felt a chill run down my spine. Brad, you need to call the marshals immediately. I already did. They're coordinating with Mexican authorities, but it's complicated. She could be anywhere by now. Mexico City, Guadalajara, maybe even Central America if she kept driving. Does she speak Spanish? Basic tourist Spanish. Nothing fluent, but she's been studying it on Duolingo for the past year. I thought she was just preparing for vacation travel. But now it seemed like she had been preparing to disappear entirely. Vanessa had always been a planner, someone who researched everything extensively before making decisions. The idea that she had been systematically preparing to flee the country while building her coaching business was both terrifying and oddly characteristic. There's something else, Brad continued. I found evidence that she's been moving money offshore for months, small transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, never large enough to trigger reporting requirements. How much money are we talking about? At least $200,000, maybe more. She's been siphoning off coaching fees and deposits into accounts that would be very difficult for authorities to freeze. The sophistication of her planning was staggering. While I had been worried about family dynamics and social media presence, Vanessa had been constructing an elaborate exit strategy that would allow her to disappear with significant assets if her business was ever exposed. Brad, this means she knew what she was doing was illegal, and she planned for the possibility of getting caught. I think you're right. This wasn't someone who gradually lost perspective and started believing her own lie. This was someone who deliberately built a criminal enterprise and prepared to flee when it collapsed. That evening, I received a call from Margaret Harrison's daughter Emily. She had gotten my number from Carmen Rodriguez and wanted to talk to someone who knew Vanessa personally. I need to understand who convinced my mother to stop taking her medication, Emily said, her voice tight with grief and anger. I need to know if she was just misguided or if she knew she was putting my mom in danger. Emily was 26, just finishing her residency in psychiatry. She understood mental health treatment in ways that made Vanessa's interference even more devastating. My mother was stable, Emily continued. She had been stable for 2 years. Her therapist was excellent. Her medication was working. She was starting to rebuild her life after the divorce. Then she found your sister's program. Emily, I am so sorry for your loss. I had no idea what Vanessa was doing until it was too late. I don't blame you. But I need to know. Did your sister really believe she was qualified to treat severe depression? Or was she just running a scam? It was the question I had been wrestling with since learning about Margaret's death. Had Vanessa genuinely convinced herself that her intuitive gifts and natural empathy were equivalent to clinical training? Or had she known all along that she was operating outside her competence while charging premium rates for unlicensed services? I think she started believing her own story, I said carefully. Vanessa has always been someone who could convince herself that whatever she wanted was justified. If she needed to be an expert to build her business, then she would become an expert in her own mind. But she had to know that telling someone to stop psychiatric medication was dangerous. That's not a gray area or a matter of opinion. That's basic medical knowledge. Emily was right. Regardless of Vanessa's self-deception about her qualification, advising someone to discontinue prescribed medication for a serious mental health condition was clearly outside the scope of any legitimate coaching practice. I think she got caught up in alternative health ideologies that position psychiatric medication as harmful, I said. There's a whole movement of people who believe that depression and anxiety are spiritual problems rather than medical conditions. That's not an excuse for what happened to my mother. No, it's not. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm trying to understand how someone I grew up with could make choices that resulted in such terrible consequences. Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but no less determined. The wrongful death lawsuit is moving forward whether your sister is captured or not. But I want more than just financial compensation. I want to make sure this can't happen to other families. What do you mean? I'm working with legislators to introduce new regulations for life coaches and wellness practitioners, requirements for disclosure of qualifications, restrictions on medical advice, mandatory reporting for anyone who claims to treat mental health conditions without proper license. That sounds important. Your sister exploited regulatory gaps that allow unqualified people to market themselves as healers and counselors. If she had been required to clearly disclose her lack of medical training, my mother would never have trusted her with something as serious as medication management. Emily's words stayed with me long after we hung up. While Vanessa was somewhere in Mexico hiding from the consequences of her actions, people were working to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. Margaret's death was becoming a catalyst for systemic changes that might protect other vulnerable people from encountering unlicensed practitioners
who preyed on their desperation for healing. The next morning brought news that the federal investigation had expanded beyond Vanessa's individual case. Carmen Rodriguez called to tell me that authorities had identified a network of unlicensed wellness practitioners who had been referring clients to each other and sharing marketing strategies. Your sister wasn't operating in isolation, Carmen explained. She was part of a community of people who were all making similar claims about trauma expertise and spiritual healing qualification. You mean there are others like her? At least a dozen that we've identified so far. They all used similar language about being certified trauma specialists and intuitive healers. They all charged premium rates and targeted women dealing with serious mental health issues. The scope of the problem was overwhelming. Vanessa wasn't an isolated case of someone who had gradually lost perspective and started believing her own lies. She was part of a systematic exploitation of regulatory gaps that allowed unqualified people to market mental health services to vulnerable populations. Are any of the others facing charges? 3 have been arrested so far, 2 in California and 1 in Oregon. The others seem to have disappeared around the same time your sister fled, which suggests they were communicating about the investigation. They all ran? Not all, but several. It's like they had a coordinated response plan for if any of them got exposed. I felt sick thinking about how organized and deliberate the deception had been. This wasn't a case of well-meaning people who had gradually overstepped their qualification. This was a network of individuals who had systematically built businesses around fake credentials and dangerous medical advice. That afternoon, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a burner phone and a single sheet of paper with instructions written in Vanessa's handwriting. Turn on at 8 p.m. tonight, delete everything after. I stared at the phone for hours, debating whether to follow the instructions or immediately turn it over to the authority. Part of me wanted to hear from her, to understand her perspective on everything that had happened, but I also knew that any communication with a fugitive could potentially make me an accessory to her crimes. At 7:55, I called Marshall. She sent me a burner phone. I said without preamble, she wants me to turn it on at 8. Don't touch it again. We're sending someone over immediately to set up monitoring equipment. 20 minutes later, my apartment was full of federal agents setting up recording devices and tracing equipment. At exactly 8 p.m., they powered on the phone and waited. It rang within seconds. Nathalie, Vanessa's voice sounded different, flatter and more tired than I had ever heard it. Vanessa, where are you? Somewhere safe, somewhere I can think clearly without being vilified by people who don't understand what really happened. What really happened is that a woman died. Vanessa, Margaret Harrison is dead because you convinced her to stop taking medication that was keeping her alive. Margaret was already struggling. Her ex-husband was manipulative. Her family was unsupportive. Her therapist was keeping her trapped in victim consciousness. I was trying to help her find real healing instead of pharmaceutical dependency. Even now, hiding in Mexico as a fugitive from justice, Vanessa was maintaining her narrative of being a misunderstood healer. She couldn't, or wouldn't acknowledge that her interference had directly contributed to someone's death. You're not qualified to make decisions about psychiatric medication, Vanessa. You never were. I had gifts that traditional training doesn't teach. I could see what people needed for real transformation, not just symptom management. You had fake certificates and no training whatsoever. Those certificates represented my true level of understanding. The official credentialing system is designed to keep people dependent on institutions that profit from keeping them sick. I looked around my apartment at the federal agents recording every word, knowing that this conversation was being used to build the case against her. Vanessa seemed completely unaware that she was providing evidence of her own guilt with every sentence. Why did you contact me?
Because you're my sister, and despite everything, I need you to know that I never intended to hurt anyone. I was trying to build something meaningful, something that would help women reclaim their power and heal from trauma. By lying about your qualifications and giving medical advice you weren't trained to give, by offering an alternative to a system that keeps women medicated and dependent instead of empowering them to transform their lives. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Vanessa alternating between self-justification and attempts to position herself as a victim of a vindictive system that couldn't tolerate alternative approaches to healing. She seemed genuinely convinced that her intentions had been pure, and that the tragic outcomes were somehow unforeseeable. When she finally hung up, the agents immediately began working to trace the call and coordinate with Mexican authorities. But I knew it was probably too late. Vanessa was smart enough to use untraceable communication methods and change locations frequently. "Did you get anything useful?" I asked Marshall Chen. She confirmed several details about her business operations that will be helpful in court. But more importantly, she demonstrated a complete lack of remorse or accountability for the harm she caused. She really believes she was helping people. That doesn't make her any less dangerous. People who believe their good intentions justify harmful actions are often the most destructive, because they can't be reasoned with or reformed. That night I lay awake thinking about the sister I had grown up with and the stranger she had become. Or maybe she had always been this person, and I had just been too close to see it clearly. The Vanessa who blocked me on social media to protect her image was the same person who had built an entire business on fake credentials and dangerous medical advice. The difference was that I had finally stopped making excuses for her behavior and started seeing it for what it actually was: a pattern of manipulation and deception that had escalated until it cost someone their life. Over the next week, the media coverage intensified as more details emerged about the network of unlicensed practitioners and the scope of their operation. Emily Harrison appeared on national news programs talking about her mother's death and the need for better regulation of wellness practitioners. Former clients came forward with stories of being convinced to abandon legitimate treatment in favor of expensive coaching programs that had left them worse off than before. Brad did an interview with CNN where he discussed the fake credentials and the sophistication of Vanessa's deception. He had to take a leave of absence from his pharmaceutical sales job because his credibility had been compromised by his association with someone who had advised people to stop taking medication. The ripple effects were destroying lives beyond just the direct victims of Vanessa's coaching practice. Brad's career was in jeopardy. Our parents were facing social ostracism in their retirement community. Extended family members were having to answer questions about how they had failed to recognize the warning sign. But the most devastating impact was on the women who had trusted Vanessa with their mental health. The Attorney General's office had identified 47 clients who had paid for coaching services based on fake credentials. Many had been advised to discontinue medication or abandon therapy. Several had experienced significant setbacks in their recovery that would require years of additional treatment to address. Carmen Rodriguez called me with updates on the international manhunt. Mexican authorities think they have a lead on her location. There was a credit card charge at a hotel in Puerto Vallarta that matches the pattern of her previous transactions. How long has she been there? The charge was from 3 days ago, but she's probably moved on by now. She seems to be staying in each location for only a few days before disappearing again. Does she have enough money to keep running indefinitely? Based on what Brad found, she could probably stay hidden for several years if she's careful with her spending. But eventually the isolation and stress of being a fugitive usually breaks people down. Most people can't handle being completely cut off from their previous life indefinitely. I wondered if that was true for Vanessa. She had always been someone who needed attention and validation from others. Living as a fugitive would mean giving up social media, public recognition, and the constant affirmation she had built her identity around. The question was whether her fear of facing consequences would outweigh her need for the spotlight. 2 days later, I got my answer. Marshall Chen called me at work with news that changed everything. She surfaced in Guatemala City, but not the way we expected. What do you mean? She's been arrested by local authorities for attempting to establish an unlicensed medical practice. Apparently, she was advertising therapeutic massage and trauma counseling services to American expatriates. I felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that she had been caught, but horror that she had apparently learned nothing from the consequences of her previous action. She was still pretending to be a licensed therapist. According to the Guatemalan police report, she was operating under the name Victoria Bell and claiming to be a certified trauma specialist from Arizona. She had created new fake credentials and was charging American tourists for services she wasn't qualified to provide. Even as a fugitive, even after someone had died as a result of her deception, Vanessa couldn't stop herself from building businesses based on lies about her qualification. It was like she was compulsively drawn to recreating the same patterns that had destroyed her life in Phoenix. What happens now? The State Department is working on extradition proceedings. It could take several months to get her back to the U.S., but she's in custody and won't be able to flee again. Will she be able to hurt anyone else while she's in Guatemala? The local authorities have been briefed on her case. She's being held on charges related to practicing without a license, and they understand that she's dangerous to vulnerable people seeking mental health treatment. That evening, I called Emily Harrison to let her know about Vanessa's arrest. "I'm glad she's been caught," Emily said, "but I'm horrified that she was apparently trying to start the same kind of operation in Guatemala. How many more people could she have harmed if she hadn't been stopped?" It was a question that haunted me. Vanessa's compulsion to present herself as a qualified healer seemed stronger than her ability to learn from consequence. Even facing decades in prison, even after causing someone's death, she had immediately begun rebuilding the same type of practice that had made her a fugitive in the first place. "Emily, do you think she'll ever understand the harm she caused?" "I don't know. Some people are so invested in their own narrative that they can't acknowledge reality, even when it's staring them in the face. My mother is dead because your sister convinced herself that her good intentions were more important than actual medical knowledge. I'm sorry that my family produced someone capable of causing so much harm. You're not responsible for your sister's choices, Natalie, but I'm grateful that you had the courage to expose her. How many more families would be grieving right now if you had decided to protect her instead of protecting her victims?" After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the sister I had loved and admired for so many years. The Vanessa who had seemed so confident and successful, who had appeared to have figured out secrets about life and happiness that I couldn't grasp. Now I understood that her confidence had been built on lies, her success had been fraudulent, and her wisdom had been dangerous nonsense that had cost someone their life. The federal marshals estimated that Vanessa would be back in Arizona within 3 to 4 months to face charges that could result in 25 years to life in prison. The wrongful death lawsuit was proceeding regardless of her location, and Emily Harrison was determined to make sure that Vanessa's assets would be used to compensate her victims, rather than fund her continued flight from justice. But for me, the most difficult part was accepting that the sister I thought I knew had never actually existed. The person I had spent my entire life trying to understand and connect with had been a carefully constructed performance designed to hide someone who was willing to risk other people's lives to maintain her own image of expertise and success. Vanessa had finally achieved the complete erasure she had been working toward when she blocked me on social media. But instead of erasing me from her perfect life, she had erased herself from reality entirely, leaving behind nothing but the devastating consequences of her lies, and the people who would spend years cleaning up the destruction she had caused. 18 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix, watching Vanessa walk into the courtroom in orange jail scrubs and shackles. The extradition process had taken longer than expected, complicated by her attempts to claim political asylum, and her hiring of expensive international lawyers with money she had hidden in offshore accounts. She looked smaller than I remembered, her famous confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had spent over a year in foreign detention facility. Her perfectly styled hair had grown out to its natural brown, and without her usual professional makeup and designer clothes, she looked more like the sister I had grown up with and less like the polished lifestyle guru she had become. Our eyes met for just a moment as she was led to the defendant's table. I had expected to feel something, anger or sadness or even satisfaction. This broken woman in prison clothes bore so little resemblance to the person who had blocked me on social media that it was hard to believe they were the same individual. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former clients and family members of people who had been harmed by Vanessa's practice. Emily Harrison sat in the front row with her father, both of them wearing buttons with Margaret's photograph. Other victims filled the surrounding seats, women who had paid thousands of dollars for unlicensed therapy that had set back their recovery by years. Brad wasn't there. He had moved to Colorado after losing his pharmaceutical sales job, unable to rebuild his career in a state where everyone associated him with Vanessa's crime. We exchanged emails occasionally, but our shared experience of being deceived by her had created a bond neither of us was comfortable maintaining. My parents sat 2 rows behind me, looking older and more frail than I had ever seen them. The public exposure of their daughter's crimes had destroyed their social standing in their retirement community. Dad had resigned from the country club board of directors, and Mom had stopped attending her book club and charity events. They had become pariahs by association, forced to confront the reality that their golden child had been living a lie that cost someone their life. Judge Patricia Soto called the court to order, and the proceedings began with the reading of charges. 23 felony counts including wire fraud, practicing medicine without a license, consumer fraud, and involuntary manslaughter in connection with Margaret Harrison's death. Each charge carried potential decades in prison, and the prosecution was seeking the maximum penalty under federal sentencing guidelines. Vanessa's defense attorney, an expensive-looking man named Harrison Wright, attempted to paint her as a well-meaning entrepreneur who had gotten swept up in the unregulated world of wellness coaching. He argued that she genuinely believed she was helping people and that the tragic outcomes were unforeseeable consequences of an industry that lacked clear standards. But the prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. They presented evidence of Vanessa's fake credentials, her systematic targeting of vulnerable women, her explicit medical advice despite having no training, and her sophisticated financial planning that suggested premeditation rather than gradual escalation. The most damning evidence came from recorded therapy sessions that Vanessa had kept as part of her business record. The prosecution played audio of her diagnosing clients with complex psychological conditions, prescribing treatment protocols, and specifically advising them to discontinue psychiatric medication. Her voice was confident and authoritative as she made claims about trauma recovery that had no basis in legitimate medical knowledge. When they played the recording of her session with Margaret Harrison, Emily's father broke down crying. Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom as she explained to Margaret that antidepressants were blocking her access to authentic emotional processing, and that true healing required feeling the full depth of her pain without pharmaceutical interference. I watched Vanessa's face as her own words condemned her. She stared straight ahead, showing no emotion as the prosecution methodically dismantled any possibility that her actions had been well-intentioned mistakes, rather than deliberate deception. The victim impact statements took an entire day. One by one, women stood up to describe how Vanessa's fake therapy had damaged their mental health, their relationships, and their trust in legitimate mental health providers. Some had been hospitalized after discontinuing medication on her advice. Others had lost jobs or custody of children after following her guidance to cut contact with supportive family members who questioned her method. Sarah Martinez, a teacher from Scottsdale, described paying $8,000 for a trauma recovery program that had convinced her to leave her husband and quit her job. Vanessa told me that my depression was actually my soul calling me to a higher purpose, Sarah testified through tears. She said my husband and my career were keeping me trapped in victim consciousness. It took me 2 years and thousands of dollars in real therapy to rebuild my life after following her advice. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse practitioner, testified about how Vanessa had convinced her to stop taking medication for bipolar disorder. She said that my mood swings were actually spiritual gifts that medication was suppressing. Within 3 weeks of stopping my lithium, I was hospitalized in a manic episode that nearly cost me my nursing license. When Emily Harrison approached the podium to speak about her mother, the courtroom fell completely silent. Emily had become a powerful advocate for mental health regulation, working with legislators to close the loopholes that had allowed unlicensed practitioners like Vanessa to operate with impunity. My mother trusted Vanessa Brooks because she presented herself as a qualified trauma specialist, Emily said, her voice steady but filled with quiet fury. She paid $5,000 for treatment that was supposed to help her recover from childhood abuse and the trauma of her divorce. Instead, she received dangerous medical advice from someone with no training, who convinced her to abandon the legitimate treatment that was keeping her stable. Emily turned to look directly at Vanessa, who continued staring straight ahead. Vanessa Brooks didn't just lie about her credentials. She didn't just take my mother's money under false pretenses. She convinced a vulnerable woman to stop taking medication that was keeping her alive, and when my mother died as a result,
Vanessa fled the country rather than face accountability for what she had done. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Emily's words hung in the air like an accusation that no amount of legal maneuvering could deflect. The defense wants you to believe that this was an unfortunate accident, that my mother's death was an unforeseeable consequence of well-intentioned coaching, Emily continued, but the evidence shows that Vanessa Brooks knew she wasn't qualified to treat serious mental illness. She created fake credentials specifically to deceive people like my mother into trusting her with their lives. She charged premium rates for services she knew she couldn't legally provide, and when the consequences of her deception became clear, she ran. When Emily finished speaking, she returned to her seat next to her father. I saw Vanessa's shoulders shake slightly, the first sign of emotion she had shown during the entire trial. For a moment I thought she might be crying, then I realized she was trying not to. The defense's case was brief and unconvincing. Wright called character witnesses who testified about Vanessa's genuine desire to help people and her belief in alternative healing methods. He presented expert testimony about the confusing and unregulated nature of the wellness industry, arguing that his client had been caught up in a system that failed to provide clear guidance about appropriate boundaries for coaches and healers. But none of it mattered in the face of the recorded sessions, the fake credentials and the systematic financial planning that proved Vanessa had known exactly what she was doing. When Wright called Vanessa to testify in her own defense, she declined. Her attorney explained that she was following legal counsel, but everyone in the courtroom understood that she had no plausible explanation for her actions. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered guilty verdicts on all 23 counts. Vanessa showed no reaction, but I saw our mother collapse against our father's shoulder. Judge Soto scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, giving the probation department time to prepare a comprehensive report on Vanessa's background and the scope of harm caused by her action. During those 6 weeks, I tried to prepare myself for whatever sentence would be handed down, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. On the morning of sentencing, Vanessa finally spoke. Against her attorney's advice, she asked to address the court before Judge Soto announced her decision. What she said next shocked everyone in the courtroom, including her own legal team. "Your Honor, I want to take full responsibility for my actions," Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have spent 18 months in custody thinking about Margaret Harrison and all the women I harmed. I convinced myself that my intentions were pure, that I was helping people find healing that traditional therapy couldn't provide, but I was lying to myself as much as I was lying to them." She turned to face the courtroom, looking directly at Emily Harrison for the first time during the trial. "I wasn't qualified to treat trauma or depression or any other mental health condition. I created fake credentials because I knew that people wouldn't trust me with their healing if they knew the truth about my lack of training. I charged thousands of dollars for services I knew I couldn't legally provide." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I told Margaret Harrison to stop taking medication that was keeping her alive. I made that recommendation knowing that I had no medical training and no right to give medical advice. I convinced her to abandon legitimate treatment because I was more interested in proving my theories about authentic healing than in protecting her safety." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen to Vanessa's confession. "Margaret Harrison died because I prioritized my business success over her well-being. She trusted me with her life, and I betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. No sentence this court can impose will bring her back or undo the harm I caused to her family and all my other victims." Vanessa looked directly at our parents, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry for the shame I've brought to our family. I'm sorry for lying to everyone who loved me and supported me. Most of all, I'm sorry to Margaret's family and to all the women who trusted me with their healing when I knew I wasn't qualified to help them." When she finished speaking, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversation. Emily Harrison was crying openly, and several former clients were visibly shaken by Vanessa's unexpected acceptance of responsibility. Judge Soto called for order and proceeded with sentence. She sentenced Vanessa to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, she ordered full restitution to all victims, the forfeiture of all assets connected to her coaching business, and lifetime prohibition from operating any kind of wellness or coaching practice. Ms. Brooks, your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust that resulted in immeasurable harm to vulnerable people seeking help, Judge Soto said. The fact that you have finally accepted responsibility for your actions is noted, but it cannot diminish the severity of the consequences your deception has caused. As Vanessa was led away in shackles, she looked back at our family one last time. I had thought I might feel satisfaction seeing her finally face justice for her crimes. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for all the lives that had been destroyed by her choices, including her own. After the sentencing, I found myself standing outside the courthouse with Emily Harrison and her father. We had developed an unlikely friendship through our shared experience of being affected by Vanessa's crimes, bonding over our determination to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. How do you feel? Emily asked me. Empty, I said honestly. She's finally being held accountable, but it doesn't bring your mother back or undo the harm she caused to everyone else. No, it doesn't, but maybe it prevents the next Vanessa Brooks from building a business on fake credentials and dangerous advice. Emily was right. The publicity around Vanessa's case had sparked legislative action in several states to regulate wellness practitioners and require disclosure of qualifications. It wouldn't save Margaret Harrison or undo the damage Vanessa had caused, but it might protect future victims from encountering similar predators. Over the following months, I slowly began rebuilding my relationship with my parents. They had been devastated by Vanessa's crimes and their own failure to recognize the warning signs. Dad developed anxiety about being recognized in public, and Mom struggled with depression about the role she had played in enabling Vanessa's sense of entitlement. We failed you both, Mom said during one of our difficult conversations about the family dynamics that had contributed to the situation. We put so much pressure on Vanessa to be perfect that she learned to lie rather than disappoint us, and we made you feel like you had to be invisible so she could shine. You didn't know she would become a criminal, Mom. No, but we created the conditions that taught her that appearance was more important than truth. We rewarded her for performing success rather than achieving it honestly. It was painful but necessary work, examining the family patterns that had shaped both of us. I began seeing a therapist myself, a licensed clinical social worker who helped me understand how growing up in Vanessa's shadow had affected my own sense of worth and belonging. Through therapy, I came to understand that my anger about being blocked on social media and excluded from family photos hadn't really been about favoritism or attention. It had been about being erased from the narrative of our family, made invisible so that Vanessa's carefully constructed image could remain intact. You weren't asking for special treatment, my therapist explained. You were asking to be acknowledged as a person who belonged in your own family. That's a basic human need, not narcissistic demand. The validation was healing in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped apologizing for existing and started building a life that was mine rather than a reaction to Vanessa's overshadowing presence. I expanded my graphic design business, eventually hiring 2 employees and moving into a larger office space in Central Phoenix. I started dating again, something I had avoided during the years when I was too focused on family drama to invest in my own relationship. I even began public speaking about the warning signs of unlicensed practitioners, working with Emily and other advocates to educate people about protecting themselves from wellness industry fraud. Vanessa and I exchange letters occasionally, brief communications about family news and her experience in federal prison. She's working in the prison library and has started pursuing a legitimate degree in social work through correspondence courses. Whether she'll ever be allowed to work in any helping profession after her release is unclear, but she seems committed to actually learning about mental health treatment rather than pretending to understand it. In her last letter, she wrote something that stayed with me. I spent so many years trying to be someone I wasn't that I lost track of who I actually was. Prison has given me time to figure that out, even if it's too late to undo the harm I caused. I don't know if Vanessa will emerge from prison as a genuinely reformed person, or if she'll find new ways to manipulate and deceive people, but I've made peace with the fact that her choices and their consequences aren't my responsibility to care. The house I live in now has large windows that let in the Arizona sunshine, and I keep the curtains open during the day. There are photos on the walls of me with friends, colleagues, and the new relationships I've built based on honesty rather than performance. It's a life that belongs to me, not one designed to accommodate someone else's need to be the center of attention. Sometimes people recognize my name and ask if I'm related to the woman who was convicted of fraud and manslaughter in the wellness industry case. I tell them yes, she's my sister, and we leave it at that. I don't explain or justify or apologize for being connected to someone who made terrible choices. I just acknowledge the relationship and move on. The truth is finally louder than all the lies that shaped our family for so many years. It's messier and more complicated than the carefully curated image Vanessa spent years constructing, but it's real, and for the first time in my adult life that feels like enough. Margaret Harrison's death will always be a tragedy that could have been prevented if someone had been brave enough to expose Vanessa's deception earlier. I carry that knowledge with me, along with the determination to speak up when I see people being harmed by those who prioritize their own image over other people's safety. The sister who blocked me on social media to protect her perfect online presence is serving 25 years in federal prison. The person I've become in her absence is someone I actually like, someone who takes up space in the world without apologizing for it, someone who understands that real love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller so others can shine bright. That's the story they probably don't want you to hear, but it's the truth, and the truth is what sets you free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.